my hope is that young people like you who are listening are now a force to be reckoned with, not found in my lifetime whatsoever, that the power of opinion and conscience expressed by demonstration or expressed by an item or something to be posted on a social media is unprecedented. Unprecedented. The hope is to make that moral force into a legal force, which forces the European governments who are still siding with Israel change their mind and change their position.
Welcome to This Is Not a Watermelon. My name is Mikey Mhenna. Today we have a very special episode with Dr. Salman Abu Sitta, who is the founder and president of the Palestinian Land Society. He's an academic and a scholar and, quite honestly, a giant in his field. It's a huge honor to have you here in the studio. Welcome.
I'm glad to be here to meet young people. Fresh minds are always welcome because they are pure.
Yeah. Well, it's an honor to have you. I first became aware of your work because I grew up across the street from AUB, and the Palestinian Land Society is an important institution. Maybe before we get into that institution's work, I'd love to talk a little bit about your memoir, Mapping My Return, which is connected to your decades of research on the Nakba. Can you tell us a little bit about how you structured that book and chose to make it a memoir as opposed to an academic history?
Well, over the course of years, you live your life as a Palestinian who became a refugee in 1948, and you go through certain processes, including my early education in England, and then my professorship in universities, and you meet various people and you speak about Palestine, and then you find that the passage of time will create a certain track which has knowledge which is of essence to younger people, starting with my two daughters and also my nephews and nieces. And I wanted to tell them about the life we lived before 1948, because all of them have been born after 1948. So they would like to know how we lived and of course, how we became refugees and how we fight it. And in the introduction, on the first pages, I say this book is dedicated to my parents, who are the first generation of my family in 12 generations who have died outside Palestine. And it is dedicated to my two daughters and the generation like them who are born outside Palestine. So this is a dividing line between the new generation who are born after 1948 and my generation and my parent generation who died outside Palestine. I can trace my family to 12 generations, and during the course of years, I have dug up any references I find about my family, and the earliest I found in 1840, just after Napoleon invasion of Egypt. But the key event which made me start on that, in 1961, I started my study for PhD at the University of London. As you might see clearly, that was merely 10 years after 1948. So I took advantage of my presence in London. I said, well, let me find about Palestine in England, which has been in Palestine for 30 years, from 1917 militarily, 1920 as a government, until 1948. So I went to Royal Geographical Society, which, as you know, is very well-known, famous organization started in the 19th century, and they have maps and documents about many countries, explorers and so on. So I thought, well, Palestine was 10 years away from that date, and they have been in Palestine for 30 years. I should find a wealth of information there. So I went to the Royal Geographical Society, and I said, can I please see the section about Palestine?
This was in 1960s.
1961, yeah. And said, what? We don't have Palestine. There is no Palestine. I said, I beg your pardon? You just left there 10 years ago, and there was a big contingent of soldiers and colonial officers and government people, and how come you don't have? He said, where is that? I said, show me a map. And I looked at the map and put my finger on Palestine. This is Palestine. Ah, I said, you mean Israel? And I was shocked, really, shocked. I mean, it was just in the near memory of anyone more than 15 years old can know where Palestine is. So this is the first time I see, to a great shock, how Palestine was erased on purpose, because it couldn't have been lost in the memory of someone. It could not have been lost with no records. The whole government, British government in Palestine, has branches in England. And then this started a long march for searching about Palestine. At the very same time, another thing which really shocked me, and I use it as a fuel for my research, is another story, also in the same period, roughly. We were given residence in England. It's called Alien's Card. Alien's Card.
Alien's Card.
Alien's Card. So I had to renew my residence at one time, and I went to the office, government office, to renew it. And, well, I was giving back the card and said, it's done. And when I left the office, I just had a look at the card, and I found that under the name of citizenship, nationality, it said uncertain, uncertain. So I walked back to the window of the office and said, sir, excuse me, there's something wrong here. You called me uncertain. I'm Palestinian. And your age could be, allow you to be one of the people who served in Palestine. I'm Palestinian. My father is Palestinian. My grandfather is Palestinian. How could you write in my card, I am uncertain, nationality uncertain? I said, he looked at me in a nice way. I said, son, I'm sorry, it's only a formality. Well, here's another shock. Here, in the bed of imperialism in London, we were denied existence and recognition. That was very shocking. So
yeah, denied as a formality.
Formality. And so, yeah. And of course, this started long search for Palestine. It's remarkable to see, as I said it so many times, so I'm repeating here, Israel robbed us of our country. They robbed us of our land and our personal property in 530 cities and villages. They robbed us of all the documents of the government of Palestine, which is our government then, like records of health, education, banking, transport, birth and deaths and all that. So they actually took everything which belongs to us, everything, materially. But otherwise, we did not lose anything. We have our memory. We have our recognition of who we are. When we left as refugees in the middle of the night under the fire or bombs or all kinds of atrocities which Israelis committed and are still committing till we are speaking now in Gaza, we have left with nothing except the memory and the personality who we are. And we took this with us, and we tried to rebuild it outside in exile, slowly, slowly, not only to ourselves, but to other people. And I needed proof for that, because my memory and my memory of my life before I became a refugee is my own. I have to tell other people about it with documentation. But the remarkable thing is that our records, all our records, not only in Palestine, in Lebanon, and Syria, and Jordan, Egypt, I find, to my great surprise, that it was kept in Europe, not in our countries.
Yeah.
Well, you find, for example, travelers in the 19th century, after Napoleon came to us. The first one actually is Count Volney, who came in 1785 to Egypt, then to Blad al-Sham, which was today Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And I find that all the written records about us, people, geography, occupations, is done by Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And why did they do that? Because they were colonial. They wanted to grab other countries. They wanted to build their power in a place they thought was vacuum. And so I was amazed, because supposing there was no Israel, and I am Palestinian, I go to Jerusalem, and then, like my father did, come to Damascus or Beirut. He doesn't need to be told who are the people in Beirut or Damascus. Mm-hmm. They are the same people. They speak the same language. And merchants come from Cairo to Damascus, and they take silk from Damascus to Cairo, and Beirut was a very active port. They did not need to be told who they are. They live their life of the people in the country. Yeah. So you don't need to be told. But the foreigners who came to describe our life for eventual Caesar of the land, they needed to know who these people, what they do, what their geography, and so on and so forth. And so, in a way, when I went to travel to Paris National Bibliothèque Nationale, and to Berlin, and to Munich, when I found wealth of early error survey, and to, of course, to New York, United Nations, and to also Washington, Library of Congress, I was collecting the record they kept of us, right? Like someone who steals your passport. And you go around and see who stole your passport. Yeah. You see your picture and that kind of thing. So that journey told me lots of things, not only to obtain records about our life in Palestine and, in fact, in the region, but also why they did it and why we did not have it, because we don't need it, they needed it.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question about pre-1948 for a second, and the role of the British in those early days. Anytime I read the history, I hear a lot about the Haganah and the sort of the terrorism, the Zionists, basically terrorist groups that were attacking the British. Can you help explain that dynamic? What was actually happening on the ground, and what was the state of general disarray and terror that indigenous Palestinians were living under?
Yes. Well, I thank you for this question, because everybody talks about that period, but people need to know about it. Let me go a little back and also tell you a personal story. In 1917, the British were in Egypt, and they started a military campaign to take over Palestine from the rule of the Ottomans. The army which the British started from Egypt, called Egyptian Expeditionary Force, which is a misnomer because it's not Egyptian, it was British. And expedition, it's not expedition, it was occupation.
Yeah.
They wanted to take over Palestine. And they came to attack Gaza first. Gaza seemed to have a long record of that. From March to probably October 1917. They failed twice to take Gaza. And they lost several thousand killed and wounded British soldiers. Why I tell you that? Because they started a third attempt to conquer Palestine by taking a diversionary route to attack Beersheba instead of Gaza. And in my search of the British Army, I found that they started from my own land, from my family land. And in their maps, it say we started from Abu Sitta land. And my mother actually told me that she remembered these British soldiers starting from our land in a diversionary route, and they took Beersheba, another big town, the east of Gaza, took it by surprise on the night of Wednesday, 31st of October, 1917. Why is this date important? Because after several failures, Allenby sent a telegram to London. We took Beersheba Jerusalem will be your Christmas present. This cable reached London next morning, November 1st. And November 2nd, Balfour, who was then foreign minister of Britain, pulled a paper from his desk and issued the Balfour Declaration, which he has secretly agreed with the Zionists some months back. Without this victory in Beersheba, starting from my family land, Balfour will not be able to make this infamous declaration or promise. Now, that is a date to be remembered, because after that, when the British administration started taking over Palestine from 1990 to 1948, what you described just now was happening.
Yeah.
Without that event, it will not happen. Now, the Zionists were a minority at the time. And when they had the chance to enter Palestine, they tried to recruit people to go to Palestine. Not many Jews in Europe wanted to go to Palestine. But during events in Germany in the mid-30s, 1930s, and the conflict between German Jews and their government after appointment of Hitler as the leader, they started to come to Palestine. So in the middle of the 1930s, there has been about 300,000 Jews coming to Palestine. This, of course, was a big shock to Palestinians to find this flow of foreigners who came under the protection of British.
So I have questions about this period. So they are coming, as you said, under the protection of the British.
Yes.
Who is providing the boats? Who is issuing the residency cards? Who is finding housing? Where are these people staying upon arrival? What is happening? And what are the local indigenous Palestinians doing to raise their concerns and say, this is not right?
Absolutely good question. Wiseman himself admitted that in the 1920s, he could not find people willing to go to Palestine, Jews, and also did not find resources to take them. But with the new government in Germany, there has been motivation to go. How did they go? They had used a Jewish financial power to rent boats from Greece, from France, and they put the immigrants on these boats, and they were taken to Palestine. Britain was the culprit which allowed that. So when they arrived to Palestine, they were given papers. I mentioned their number, 30% of Palestinian population by the end of 1930. This date is very important. Your question is very relevant because there was very large number of people who have no place to stay.
Yeah.
You see, the Jews, mostly Arab Jews, who have been present in Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, they were Ottoman subjects, normal people speaking Arabic and so on. But they had the Zionists, European Zionists, were able to buy land probably up to 1 to 2% of Palestine. And so they had very little land, but they have so many people. And they put them almost in camps on this tiny piece of land. And in order to expand their power in Palestine, they formed the Haganah. Let me go back now how the Haganah was formed. The first High Commissioner the British sent to Palestine in 1920 is Herbert Samuel. He's British, but he is ardent Zionist. So his plan was to convert, under the protection of Britain, to convert Palestine into what would be, quote unquote, national home, as Balfour says, but in fact, they wanted to establish a state. In his short period of stay, 5 years, he enacted hundreds of laws in Palestine, changing the laws of the land, allowing the Jews in Palestine to be coming, they have not come yet in 1920, to have their own schools, their own banking system, as I said, their own education, own commerce, and their own representative council. The irony is the majority of the population, who are 95% Palestinian, they were denied the right to have a representative council. And so the frame of the would-be state in Palestine for Jews was created by Herbert Samuel, but there were no takers. Only in the mid-30s they came. And your question is right. Where did they stay? They stayed in kibbutz, in camps, on the little land which the Jews had before. And they formed the Haganah. The Haganah, of course, is the forerunner of the Israeli army. The British not only allowed the Haganah to be formed and denied that to the Palestinians, but they armed the European Jews. They trained them, they gave them uniform, they taught them how to fight in something called SNS, Special Night Squads, by a British general, taught them how to fight. And so when the big Palestinian revolt against the British from 1936 to 1939 started, they were fighting, Palestinians were fighting the British and the embryonic army of the Israelis named the Haganah. It's a sordid part of the history of British, because you came to be a protector and initiator of independence according to the agreement in the First World War. Instead, you betrayed the people of Palestine and the Arab countries, and you had an army, foreign army, trained and did that. In my case, in my family case, we fought against the British and, of course, the Haganah in 1948. My own elder brother was a leader of the resistance, and they actually kicked the British out of the southern half of Palestine in Beersheba for 1 year. And the revolt, Palestinian revolt in Palestine stopped. How did they stop? They stopped because the British encouraged the Arab leaders to send a message to Palestinians saying, stop fighting the British will give you back your rights, and so on. That was a lie, of course, on the side of the British. It was also deception on part of the Arab rulers at the time. They sent a message saying, we, the kings and presidents of Arab countries, we urge you, Palestinians, to stop your revolt because we believe in the goodwill of Great Britain to restore your rights, and so on. And that failure, unfortunately, was repeated in 1948. So
the one thing about the story of the Haganah that I always find surprising is that from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, the Haganah targeted the British, which I don't think people really understand.
Yes, I love that question.
Yeah, so explain this to me.
I love that question. The Zionists used the British to have strong presence in Palestine. And by the end of 1939, when the Palestinian revolt against the British was stopped, the Palestinian society was decimated by the British. For the first time in our history, the British planes bombed villages. They initiated a group punishment. They arrested leaders. They dissolved political parties. They probably killed or imprisoned or injured 50,000 people of, at that time, a small population. So by the end of 1939, the Palestinian society was completely defenseless, unable to defend itself. Then came the Second World War. So Britain offered consoling promises to the Palestinians not to revolt again, and everybody was busy with the Second World War. By this time, the Haganah organized itself even more. 5 years, up till 1945, they were able to organize themselves. They were able to bring more Jews to Palestine through illegal immigration or immigration hidden or covered by the British government. So by 1945, a number of things happened. Number one, the Zionists were sure that the Palestinians are not able to defend themselves because of the action British. Second one is that the British are exhausted and hardly escaped unscathed from the Second World War by the intervention of the United States. So the British were weak and unable to be of any force. And then the Zionists decided this is the time to jump on Palestine and take it over. Who is against them? Who is likely to oppose them? The Palestinians are almost absent because they are wounded and almost destroyed. The British, under the name of mandate, were in Britain. So they decided to attack their erstwhile benefactors and kick the British out. That is a supreme example of gratitude which the Zionists had. And they started a campaign of terror against the British themselves. They don't need them anymore. So they wanted to take over Palestine, and possibly the British will resist that in some measure. So they killed their soldiers, they hanged their soldiers in trees, they kidnapped their judges, they blew up King David Hotel where the British administration was, and they continued that terror campaign against the British.
And I read that there was part of the reason why the intensity of that terror campaign increased was because there was fear that the British might actually rescind and side with Palestinians. Is there any validity to that?
No, the British obviously would never side with Palestinians, but they had to, at least theoretically, stand by their obligations under the mandate.
Okay.
Now, let us see what the mandate says. The mandate given to Palestine says that Palestinians have the right to self-independence, and the role of the British is to help them build institutions for the state. And the betrayal of the British is very clear. Instead of building institutions for independent Palestine, they actually allowed others to take it over. Let us remember one thing. When the United Nations issued the mandate, they issued the mandate in several grades. One is called Mandate A, Class A. Class A means the country is ready for independence, but they need help in building institutions of the government. And who was given this class of mandate? Palestine and Iraq. Iraq used that, and the British helped them to build an independent country of Iraq under Mandate A. And Palestine was in the same category, but enter the Zionists, and they destroyed that with the help of the British. And so the Zionists, and the surprising thing to me is that when the Palestinians resisted the British in order to stay in their own country free from occupation, they were treated brutally. And when the Zionists attacked the British soldiers themselves, they were tolerated. And of course, not only that, after the British left unceremoniously, the British left many countries with great celebration of handing over the government to the local people left, except in Palestine. The British High Commissioner left Palestine in a small boat with no word of goodbye, neither from Arabs who were betrayed, nor by Zionists who should be grateful to him. It was the most unceremonious departure of British official in any country controlled by Britain at the time. Now, they left Palestine to whom? To 120,000 Haganah soldiers formed into 9 brigades. They had the full freedom to attack Palestine. They attacked 530,000 villages, made them refugees, and today there are 9 million Palestinians who are refugees. They committed 156 atrocities and massacres because you could not depopulate a country who's older than any country in Europe except by brutal force, by massacres and horrendous massacres. We know many of them, of course, Deir Yassin and Dawaima and we have a list of all those. We made forensic analysis of all these massacres. But to live in this age today, you as a young man, and you see what's happening in Gaza, you may find it surprising. I don't, because the Zionists, who called themselves Israelis later, did the same all the time from 1948. Yeah. Now, the only difference is that we have social media, we have internet, and so on. I say to you, and I write about it so many times, that if we had this small device called mobile, 1948, we probably would not be able to be depopulated from 530,000 villages. Maybe they will manage 1 or 2 or 5 or 10, and the world will raise up their arms and say, why do you expel people from their homes? Yeah. Right?
I'm going to ask you a weird question, but I don't think I know the answer to it. And since I have you here, I need to ask. They depopulated 532 villages. Mm. Why wasn't it 1,532? What stopped them from depopulating everything? Was there something that stopped the Nakba from becoming a complete, entire annihilation? I mean, what stopped the Nakba in its tracks at some point to become an even greater travesty?
What you are saying is, why did the Zionist Occupation of Palestine stop at 78% Palestine?
That's exactly what I'm asking you.
And not continue. That's again a good question. They actually wanted to absorb as much as they can control. And in this area, 78%, let us remember one thing. There is something called the Partition of Palestine, which is passed by the United Nations. Of course, the Israelis always claim that we did this because the partition plan passed this resolution to give us more than 50% of Palestine. The partition plan allowed Jewish government in 55% of Palestine. But that does not mean that the people in that part, who are half the population were Arab Palestinians, are to be removed. They cannot be removed. But the partition plan has no legal value. It's not binding. It was mere recommendation, because the United Nations itself said that we have no authority to divide countries, right? So the Israelis used that as a thin thread of legality to occupy more of Palestine. They exceeded the 55% Palestine because they were able to do that.
Yeah.
Why did they stop? Ben-Gurion said, we cannot chew more than that. And we should always claim that we are partitioned Palestine, and so we do not want to take over Palestine. In the south, Gaza Strip, they could not do that. They want to take over Gaza Strip. But the Egyptian army, under the leadership of Ahmed Fuad, brilliant and courageous man, he defended Gaza Strip. But in the eastern part of Palestine, which is now the West Bank, they had an agreement with King, it was Amir Abdullah, but he became King Abdullah of Jordan, to divide Palestine. We'll give you a chunk of Palestine, and you agree that we are regular and rulers of the rest of Palestine. So they made a deal. But this deal between Jordan and the Israelis were denied and absolutely abhorred by the Palestinians. Mm. And they tried to form a government called All Palestine Government under Haj Amin Husseini, who was the natural leader of Palestine. And this All Palestine Government was not allowed to continue after 4 or 5 years.
Who stopped it from being?
The failure of the Arab countries to support the right of Palestinians in Palestine. One thing, King Abdullah of Jordan took 20% of it, and the other countries were either unable or unwilling to defend the right of Palestinians to be in Palestine. So there are two people who were against that. Palestinians were, of course, against the occupation by Zionists of 78%. But the other thing is, the Zionists themselves were against the decision of Ben Gurion to stop at that point. Even now, historians like Benny Morris chide Ben Gurion for failing to take over Palestine. But Ben Gurion was a clever leader. He said, we cannot chew more than this. And let us tell the world we are only dividing Palestine, and let a small chunk of Palestine to remain under our friend, King Abdullah of Jordan, who signed a secret treaty with us. So they were all conspiring against Palestinians, whether Arab or Jew, and created that. And of course, 1967, the Israelis went further and took the West Bank, Gaza, Sinai, Golan Heights, and later southern Lebanon. The aim was always there, but the politics of power in 1948 told them that we never believed that we could have so much of Palestine, 78%. Let us settle on it.
Yeah. I want to ask you, I told you this before we started the interview when I first reached out to you, is that there's a period of Palestinian history that I really don't know much about. And that's the period during which the United Arab Republic was a sort of governing force in the Gaza Strip. And I don't know much about that period, and I think a lot of people don't know much about that period. Yeah. So can you help us understand a little more about Egypt's role in Gaza and what happened, how did it start, and how did it end?
Yes. Let me start by how I became a refugee.
Yeah.
I was in a boarding school. My father built a school in our area in 1920. And I did 4 years in that. Then I went to a higher school in Beersheba, a boarding school. And in April 1948, the headmaster came to us and said, the Israelis, the Zionists or the Haganah are killing people in Deir Yassin. I cannot protect you. You have to go back to your families. And so I, with 2 other children, aged 10, had to walk about 40 kilometers away to reach our families. And then on the 14th of May, that was 6 weeks later, the Haganah attacked our own place called Al-Ma'in Abu Sitta. They came to attack us in 24 armored vehicles. We had in defense maybe 10, 15 rifles. And people kept shooting at them, but after several hours, they managed to, of course, to overtake them. And they blew up the school which my father built in 1920. We have Bayara, which is, motorized well. They blew up that, and they burnt houses, and they killed everyone in sight. And that was on the 14th of May, 1948. On the day I became refugee, on that day, Ben Gurion was standing in a room, a hall in Tel Aviv, telling his settlers that now we announce the declaration of the State of Israel. So, by coincidence, on the date of the declaration of State of Israel, I became a refugee. And my family sent me to Egypt to continue the study. At that time, southern portion southern half Palestine, was defended by the Egyptian forces. They failed to protect 50% of Palestine, and they were driven almost out of Palestine, except for the courage, personal courage, of the military leader of the army, the Egyptian army, Ahmed Fouad. He refused the orders of the Egyptian government, and he sent historic telegrams saying that my military honor doesn't allow me to leave 200,000 women and children for the Jews to butcher them like chicken. These are his exact words. And that's how, almost by accident, by the courage of this man, the Gaza Strip was saved as it is called today. It is actually 550 square kilometers, but through some secret negotiation, it was reduced to 365. One of the officers who saw this and was present in this war is Jamal Abdel Nasser. Jamal Abdel Nasser was second in command with his superior officer called Sayyid Taha. They were held in an enclave called Fallujah, and they refused to surrender. And according to armistice agreement, they left Fallujah in honor, carrying all their arms, provided that people of Fallujah and Iraq Manshia next door to be safe in their life and property. That was in the agreement signed by the United Nations. And so the Egyptian army left there. Of course, following their regular custom, the Haganah betrayed that agreement and kicked the people out. Now, Abdel Nasser overthrew King Farouk, and Egypt became under the administrative rule of Egypt. Egypt never annexed Gaza. They ruled it as administration, and they kept the character of Palestine in Gaza. To this day, actually, Palestinian flag was raised. There is a Palestinian mini parliament there, and Abdel Nasser then, with Syria, they created the United Arab Republic. Abdel Nasser, because of his close knowledge of Palestine, he was a great supporter of Palestine and Palestinians. He allowed Palestinian students to be educated in Egypt free of charge, which has been a boom to their life as refugees, because many of them became teachers, engineers, and doctors, and they worked in the Gulf, and they made the backbone of the later to be PLO, Palestine Liberation Organizations, and so on. So here is a contrast between what happened to the part of Palestine in Jordan under King Abdullah, and King Hussein later abandoned Palestine, so it's neither allowed it to be a country of Palestine and independent as much as possible, nor they kept it Arab. They lost it in 1967 easily, and then they just disbanded any connection with the West Bank. So this is not a very good history. And as you know, in Gaza, it's now the citadel of resistance. And amazing that 1.3% of Palestine, now we are almost 200 days, and they did what no Arab army could do that. They did not surrender. They kept the Israeli army at bay. Of course, they lost 100,000 people between killed and injured, which is plain genocide. But they did not surrender. And they wanted to push them here and there, find them a refugee place, and they decided they are not cheap to be moved from one place to another. But the price of the blood of 100,000 Palestinians, still going on, by the way, did something which, in my own life, I have never seen done before. The case of Palestine and Palestinians reached all corners of the world, all corners, from Argentina, Chile, to New Zealand, to everywhere, demonstrations, even in European countries siding with Israel are there. So my hope is that young people like you who are listening are now a force to be reckoned with, not found in my lifetime whatsoever, that the power of opinion and conscience expressed by demonstration or expressed by an item or something to be posted on a social media is unprecedented. Unprecedented. The hope is to make that moral force into a legal force, which forces the European governments who are still siding with Israel change their mind and change their position. I really must, when you're looking at the history of Palestine for the last at least 2,000 years, the West, which is attacking us under the name of General Guru or Alimbi, or now under the banner of Israel, has always been attacking us. I mean, when countries like England, Germany, and France rushing to Tel Aviv to give their obedience to Netanyahu, saying, "We are with you, we're with you," they are the very same people who started colonization of the Arab countries in the First World War.
Yeah.
They are the people who attacked us 1,000 years ago under the name the Crusaders' War. They are the very same people. We have done nothing to them except giving them the civilization through Spain, through Italy in the Middle Ages. It's the same enemy. I don't know why they continue to do that.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? When is the first time in your life that you heard the term Israeli?
Yes, that's again a good question. We call them the Jews.
But I never understood that. I want to ask you about this because the semantics are important. Because I'm sure growing up you had many Palestinian Jewish friends. I'm sure there were...
Not in my area. Before 1948, there were Jews, Arab Jews, but in Jaffa and Jerusalem and few places. They were not in the countryside. The Jews before 1948 were not in the countryside. It's very important to know because these Jews were Arab Jews. Yeah. They lived for many centuries in Al-Khalil, Hebron. In Safad, they had religious connections with Safad. And of course, in Jerusalem, increasing in number, but they were Arab Jews. The European Jews came before Balfour. They came in small numbers as pilgrims. But of course, after Balfour, they came with the intent to occupy Palestine. And they were anathema to the Arab Jews.
Of course.
They called them Ashkenazis because they came from Al-Khazar kingdom. They are converted to Judaism in Khazar kingdom in the Russian steppes, eastern Russia and Poland. They are called Ashkenazis. They came with the intent to take over Palestine. So the genuine Arab Jews were against that, and they were not really doing that because they were living peacefully. Now, coming to your question, we always called them Jews, or Arab, or Ashkenazis, or European Jews. That name remained to be called that until Israel declared itself, and the Haganah was converted into something called Israel Army, right? And then Israel entered the United Nations. And so, very reluctantly, the Arabs used the word Israel in quotation marks.
In that time, in 1948, did you say, what is Israel? And no, I've never heard this term before. Was that like a new term?
No, we say Jews. Jews took over Palestine. We did not use the word Israel at all. It has no physical or meaning to us. That's very important. It took many years for people to use the word Israel.
Yeah. Okay. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you if you can tell us a little bit about the Palestinian Land Society. What is this place? What does this center do? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yes. As I told you, my journey with knowledge about Palestine, I collected so much material and so on, and said then we have to make that knowledge formalized. So I established Palestinian Land Society in London in the year 2000, which is now 24 years ago. And it's a society to document, I quote from the charter, document Palestine land and people, and to defend their rights. When I collected this information, it has to be published somehow. So I published several atlases. One of them, the Atlas of Palestine, 1917 to 1966, a big compendium in 700 pages. It is published now. First issue was 2010, published in English, then in Arabic, then in Spanish, and then in Russian. And then I published another atlas, Atlas of Palestine, 1871 to 1877, which is Palestine under the Ottomans, before the Zionist colonization of Palestine, where there is not a Zionist colony whatsoever in Palestine. And then we published several hundred papers about Palestine and refugees and all that. But the key question, as an engineer and a planner, you cannot stop by telling people about history. As a planner who built many projects around the world, you have to convert that knowledge into a project. So we started then designing how we can go back to Palestine. And I have several research papers and projects under the word return plan. I found out, to the surprise of many, that today 87% of the Jews live only in 12% of Palestine, which means that the land of 500 Palestinian villages and their people who are refugees today are still empty. So the return, which is to Palestinians sacred, legal, and possible, is really possible. And we charted how many Palestinians can return and where to return, and their route from Lebanon, from Syria, from Jordan, and of course from West Bank and Gaza, and we found it absolutely feasible. And we have now plans on screen to identify every camp of refugees and where they come from villages, and what is the route of their return, which, by the way, none of them needs more than 15 or half an hour to reach home. Mm-hmm. So the plan on computer using geographical information system is developed so that we can identify the people of any village, where they are in any refugee camp anywhere, and where is their original home and how they can get there. Now, when they get there, who will they find in their place? I just said that I found that Israel is practically empty. There is only concentration of Israeli Jews now in 3 areas: West Jerusalem, Tel Aviv area, and Haifa. The rest, Palestinians can return there, which is, of course, supported by Resolution 194, which has been affirmed by the United Nations more than 130 times, longer than any resolution in the UN history. And it becomes part of international law. So they have the right to return, and they can return. But we went one further as planners of the return. When they return, Israelis destroyed their houses, as they now destroy Gaza, so they need to rebuild their houses. So we started 8 years ago competition among young Palestinian architects who are about to graduate. And we ask them to enter into competition. We give them a number of villages each year. We give them data about these villages, as they were aerial photos of the village as it was, its population, everything about it. And we give them projection of how many people they are today. And then we have them submit designs of how to reconstruct that village completely. We have an international jury, mostly British, judge the results each year in September. So far, we have 270 young Palestinian architects entered this competition in the last 8 years. The next one will be announced in September in London. And we finished the complete reconstruction plans for 60 Palestinian villages distributed all over Palestine, and the hilly side, and the coastal area, and the arid area, and so on. So we have all the wherewithal to return as we should, because it is an unusual anomaly in history that Palestine, between Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt, to be the only one which is not Arab and Palestinian. You cannot have a bald spot in the Arab world which is in existence for thousands of years. The anomaly of Israel is really an anomaly by every possible consideration, by legal, historical rights, and all that. Now, I know from many people, I'm digressing a little here, but it's irrelevant, a lot of European and American Jews are for the first time raising their voices against Zionism and against Israel.
Yeah.
A conference I attended recently was organized by European Jews
anti-Zionist.
Right.
Yeah.
So let us hope that right to be restored to his people after 76 years now, after so many people killed, and let this be a lesson to the world that evil has a limited life and that justice must prevail even if it takes too long. Justice must prevail.
Doctor, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It's a privilege and an honor to have you on.
Thank you for having me.